Before I start this video, make sure to use my TCG Player affiliate link down below in the description. Also, if you do want to support the channel even further, consider becoming a patron. There are some great benefits including giveaways, early access to videos, and can be featured in gameplay videos in the future. Today's patron shoutout goes to Neil Farewell. Thank you so much for being a patron. I can't thank you enough for being a patron ever since September. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG. And in this video today, to kick things off for murders at Karlov Manor, I'm going to discuss Judith, Carnage, Connoisseur. Out of the commanders so far that were spoiled today, I feel like this one was most interesting, at least in my opinion. I do like the Is It one having a sacrifice theme with creatures. Aside from that, I feel like Judith has a very interesting ability. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you choose one. That spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink, or you make a 2/2 red imp creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So after reading that text, this feels very similar to Fire Song and Sunspeaker, but it does give the additional bonus of giving a death touch, which is super impactful. Say for example, somebody has a big creature on the battlefield like a Colossal Dreadmaw and you need to destroy it, you could just cast a lightning bolt to deal 3 damage to it. Because that lightning bolt now has death touch because of that ability, you can kill that Colossal Dreadmaw. I will say there's also a lot of technicalities when it comes to this ability of giving a spell death touch and lifelink. Lightning bolt will work because it deals damage. However, a card like Blood Pact, where you have that ability to lose 2 life, won't affect that and you won't gain 2 life. I thought I would mention that just to clear things up before getting into the deck tech. So I do really like this card. I like the fact that it does make a token on the battlefield. Say for example, you just cast a regular instant or sorcery spell that draws you a card, you could just make an imp instead of giving that spell death touch or lifelink, so it does have that versatility. So a spell slinger thing in Rakdos is very cool. So without further ado, let's get into some of the cards that I would suggest for you. So after brewing this deck, I feel like there's a lot of considerations you need to have before building it. Of course, having that ability of giving your spells Death Touch and Lifelink can be very impactful, essentially being a board wipe for your opponent's creatures, especially when you consider spells like Blazing Volley, Tectonic Hazard, or even End the Festivities. These each do a similar thing where, for example, Blazing Volley will deal 1 damage to each creature your opponent controls, Tectonic Hazard will deal 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, and End the Festivities goes a little further and goes for each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So obviously Blazing Volley is the least impactful compared to End the Festivities, where I think it's the best out of these options. So if you give the spell Lifelink and Death Touch, all the creatures on the battlefield that your opponents control will die unless they do have Indestructible or some way to regenerate itself. And you could potentially gain a lot of life. Say for example with End the Festivities, you deal 1 damage to each opponent, so there's 3 life gain right there. And say for example there was 10 creatures on the battlefield that your opponents control, you'll deal 1 damage to each of them, and they will all die because of that Death Touch ability, but then you will gain 10 life off of that. The only problem I do find about these is the fact that they are kind of commander reliant. If you do have these in your hand but you don't have your commander out on the battlefield, these are kind of useless unless a lot of people do have mana dorks on the battlefield. Another fun card I do want to mention is Blasphemous Act. You could potentially kill your Judith, but that's not a big deal. Judith's ability will resolve when you give that spell Death Touch and Lifelink. And let's again go back to that hypothetical situation where everybody in total has 10 creatures on the battlefield. Blasphemous Act resolves and you'll gain 130 life. Of course, that's a small example. There could be a lot more creatures or a lot less creatures on the battlefield, but again, you're killing all the board and also you're gaining a bunch of life. Of course, if you're throwing a lot of damage out of the way, you might as well use damage doublers like Sulfim, Mayhem Dominus, Furnace of Wrath, and Angrath's Marauders. And so what I do like about these effects is the fact that each of them kind of serve a purpose. Of course, Sulfim has that ability to give itself indestructible, so if you do a board wipe like Blasphemous Act, it's going to be okay because you can give itself indestructible. I do also especially like Furnace of Wrath in this deck. A lot of people might not want to play it because of course you could damage yourself, but if you're playing an instant or sorcery spell that's going to be damaging you too, that's going to be fine because obviously you're going to gain gain life off of that, and it's going to be basically disregarding that other text of dealing damage to you. And of course, the same thing can be said for Angrath's Marauders. What a really good card, especially in the deck. So damage doublers can be good, but why not damage triplers? So Fiery Emancipation, City on Fire, and also Isengard Unleashed. I particularly like City on Fire. Out of these options, the best, because of course with Judith, we're going to be making those tokens on the battlefield, and we can convoke City on Fire with all those tokens we do make. They are a red source, so of course we can convoke into those 3 red pips. So of course these would also be fine additions to the deck. Because Judith is an odd converted mana cost commander, Obosh the Prey Piercer would be a really good companion for her. Obviously you'd have to take out all the even converted mana cost spells. That's a small downside because Obosh will double the damage of all your spells, and honestly I feel like that could be worth it in some situations. However, this is just more of a suggestion than actually making a companion. You totally can, but it can be a great card in the 99 if you choose so. So burn can be a really good strategy, but also remember you're making a lot of tokens when you cast instant or sorcery spells. You might as well take advantage of sacrificing those tokens with some card draw. So a couple cards that came to mind are Deadly Dispute, also Bankrupt in Blood, Corrupt Conviction, and Village Rites. So of course each of these have that additional cost to sacrifice a creature. You would probably want an imp on the battlefield before casting one of these spells, but when you do have an imp on the battlefield, you could sacrifice one of those or 2 of those depending on if you have Bankrupted Blood in your hand. Then because you sacrifice those imps, you could deal 2 damage to each opponent, and on top of that make an additional imp with that ability with Judith. Then after that you get additional value by drawing more cards. That's a win-win in my opinion. With the next one, it's not necessarily a instant or sorcery spell, but I feel like God Eternal Bontu could be pretty powerful in this deck. Say for example you're stacking up a lot of imps on the battlefield and you're casting a lot of instant or sorcery spells, you could just cast God Eternal Bontu to sacrifice all those imps, deal a lot of damage to your opponents depending on how much imps you have on the battlefield, then draw that many cards. Plus what I especially do like about God Eternal Bontu is the fact that he can essentially come back and then do the thing all over again by sacrificing a lot of permanents so that you can get more card draw. So again, I do feel like this is a very good card overall to add into the deck, even though it's not an instant or sorcery spell. I did also want to quickly highlight Wheel of Misfortune. I feel like this is a great card in the deck because of course it's really negating the life loss that you're going to be taking. So as long as Judith does not get removed before you cast the spell, I feel like overall you could get a lot of card draw out of this and you won't get the life loss effect off of it. But of course I do want to talk about winning the game because of course when you go into a commander game, obviously you want to have fun, but the game does need to end sometime. So there's a couple cards that I do want to discuss that could potentially win you the game if. So the first card I do want to highlight is Command the Dreadhorde. Honestly, for the longest time I've been wanting to make this card work in a lot of commander games, but I feel like I might want to use too much life and then I could be dead the next turn if somebody swings into me. However, because this is a sorcery and Judith does read whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you could choose one and you could choose to give this lifelink. All damage that you would give to yourself with Command the Dreadhorde will be negated. So this does act as a Rise of the Dark Realms for creatures and planeswalkers. So you could resurrect cards from your graveyard, or also you could resurrect cards from your opponent's graveyards. So of course if somebody's playing a graveyard deck or if somebody's playing a mill deck, you're going to have a really good time with this. Also, because you may be casting a lot of instant or sorcery spells, Aetherflux Reservoir will be really good for you because whenever you cast a spell, you may gain 1 life for each spell you cast this turn. So of course, you are in a little bit of a spell slinger theme, casting a lot of instant or sorcery spells. The more you do cast, the more life you are going to gain. Then eventually you can go to that Death Star moment by paying 50 life, dealing 50 damage to any target. Of course, you could take advantage of a lot of board wipes like Chandra's Ignition or Blasphemous Act. You'll definitely gain a lot of life off of those because of Judith's ability of giving it lifelink. The more creatures that are on the battlefield, the more life you will gain. Again, going back to that scenario where you cast a Blasphemous Act and there's 10 creatures on the battlefield, you could gain 130 life potentially, then potentially shoot down everybody on the table depending on how much life you have in total. So yeah, this is pretty awesome, not gonna lie, but can be pretty glass cannon-y with Judith, especially because if somebody removes the Judith before that, you can be a little out of luck. However, that's gonna do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on me brewing around Judith, Carnage, Connoisseur. Again, I feel like this is a very powerful commander that could take advantage of those instant and sorcery spells that do a lot of damage so they could gain a lot of life, or take advantage of those small spells to ping every creature on the battlefield with Death Touch. In a way, this kind of feels like a Magecraft commander, but I feel like it could potentially be very good. Obviously, it does have that second ability, which you probably should not forget. Obviously, a lot of people may be hung up on that Death Touch and Lifelink ability, but you can make imps on the battlefield so that you can make a huge army and deal deal a lot of damage when they do die. But let me know down below in the comments, what do you think of Judith, Carnage, Connoisseur? I do think this is a pretty powerful commander. Is there any other commander you'd like to see me brew around in this channel? Again, let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.